crazy idea. What if we just called all the schools? And and the next day I emailed them, I said, well, I'm just crazy enough to do that. So that's what we did. And most of them went faster than you'd think, because you will not be surprised to hear that people could answer pretty quickly whether they had scaffolding up or not. And for the most part, all they had to do was kind of look around the office to find someone who had a really good sense of how long it had been up. So, and it went faster than I had feared it might. It's not the perfect data set, to be clear. A lot of the things that's like, well, we didn't call every school in every borough. 2 I couldn't get a hold of, but
it's a pretty good data set.
The scaffold permits are also on the DOB website, which are easy to find.
Yeah. So the issue was, we had a spreadsheet that we got from Gail Brewer's office, but because of exactly that, of where it pulls from, for example, like PS 333 and PS 165, the most recent ones we could see were from like, the earliest were like 2018, right? And we know that it goes back farther than that. So Max and I looked at that Excel spreadsheet and said, this is not complete, because it doesn't go back far enough, which is the problem.
The spreadsheet, but the DOB.
Yeah. But I think that's where it was pulling for anyway.
Yeah.
It's a good, if we want to build out if we decide we want to build out I clearly should have done a brainstorm with you too. Anyway, it got done. But yeah, it was interesting. Max and I looked at that Excel spreadsheet when it came through and we went, well, this doesn't solve our problem. So.
Yeah, I do know we're not being recorded, right?
Actually, we are.
We are recording.
Oh, okay. But we haven't started the meeting, right?
Not officially, no.
Oh.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
We've lost a couple of members.
We've lost Ben, who has taken over Landmarks.
Right.
So that is to be expected. We also don't have.
Oh, our guest is with us. I see.
Guest is with us, so we can start on that front for sure.
I think you lost. Okay, Christine.
Good evening.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, Kristen. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Welcome. We'll get, for those of you who have copies of the agenda, we're going to shift around a little bit because we have business to take care of, such as budgeting and DNA, and we don't want to take up Christine's time. Although what she'll be speaking with us about is relevant to what we will be thinking about later. But anyway, Christine, we are moving you up to number 1 on the agenda. And let me just tell the folks who are here, Christine has been the superintendent for District 3 for the past 3 years. And as many of you, if not all of you know, that with our new city administration, a lot of shuffling and changes are being made in just about every department of the administration, including schools. So they have opened up positions such as superintendents of schools, and much like the federal government, I guess, when there's a new administration, those who have held the position have been invited to reapply. So there is a lot of shifting and juggling going on. And we don't know where we're going to wind up in terms of what District 3 will get, but we are extremely lucky to have with us Christine, who, as I said, has been the superintendent here for the past 3 years. And what we are sort of doing and hoping for is that in our conversations with Christine, we will learn an awful lot about the needs and the deficits in our schools and where as a community board we might be heading. And we're working towards, Bev, you will be pleased to hear, a sparkling district needs presentation. And we will learn a lot of what we need to know from Christine. So without any further ado, Christine, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you so much.
Welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And Courtney, thank you so much for reaching out. And it's my pleasure to be in community with CB7. We had our first live CEC meeting last night. So I saw Mark there and members of our community. So it was really nice to be back in person. So Blanche, you are absolutely on target with the new administration. There has been some changes in leadership. You know, to be completely transparent, and I've been very transparent about this, I did apply to the process like many superintendents. And, you know, I was told that I was not going to move on in the process. And then there was a big hullabaloo in terms of the press and the media. And I was asked to re-engage and come back into the process. And while I was, you know, appreciative of the offer, you know, in that time period, which was only about a day or two, I began to really, you know, do some soul searching in terms of, you know, how I want to, you know, how I want to spend my time as we move forward. So it was a difficult decision. At the same time, I think the department is moving in a different direction. And there are two candidates, Daniel Russo, who is a deputy superintendent in the Bronx, and Kamar Samuel, who is a superintendent, sitting superintendent in District 13. Both of which are, you know, amazing colleagues. I don't know Daniel all that well, but Kamar is someone that I have collaborated with in the last few years. So I do believe that the district will be in good hands. So when Courtney reached out to me to ask me about the needs of the district, I really had to think a lot about that because, as you may know, District 3, we encompass 30 schools from, you know, 61st Street up to 123rd. And there are very, very diverse needs across our district. One thing I will say is that what we're dealing with right now, and since the pandemic, we've lost almost 2,000 students. And Blanche, you're correct. I started September of 2019. At that time, we had over 13,000 students in District 3. And now we have a little over 11,000. So we lost 2,000 students across District 3. And in looking at those enrollment patterns, they are in many different, like we can't really figure out like where schools were hit more. We do know that in the downtown area of the Upper West Side, between blocks of, I would say, you know, 72nd Street up to 89th Street, the schools within that catchment area have experienced an awful lot of attrition. And as a result of that, that created a lot of challenges. However, this year, schools were held harmless as it relates to the budget, right? So they did not necessarily have to excess teachers. They did not have to cut programs, et cetera. However, this year, while we are very thankful and grateful that the C4E budget has stabilized and all schools are being funded 100% or even more, when it comes to the equalization and the stabilization in terms of bare student funding, we are experiencing budget deficits, right? So while those budget deficits are related to enrollment, there is quite a bit of shuffling and accessing that's happening across our schools. Just in the past few days, there was a number of schools that had to send those accessing letters out to their teachers. And we're supporting principals the best we can. And like I said last night at the CEC meeting, the way in which we are doing that, my team as well as the budget office are working with principals to really look at their budgets and see what we can do to ensure that the priorities of their schools as it relates to instruction, professional development for teachers, social emotional learning for our students, that there are foundational pieces that stay, and we're working really hard to make that happen. I will say that this year we have the opportunity to really experience smaller class sizes across the district. In some classes, we've had as small as 13, 14 students in third grade specifically, in some of our early childhood classes. And that's been wonderful because especially coming back from the pandemic, that has made a big difference, especially has to do with the social distancing and mask mandates that have made it really difficult for students to really engage in the way that we want them to. So we're really looking at ways that we can be innovative, support our principals as much as possible, but at the same time, we are dealing with this reality of being funded the way that we're supposed to be funded. And that's been really difficult, especially for principals who are experiencing budget cuts of hundreds of thousands of dollars and having to access our least senior teachers. And in District 3, because our schools are so amazing, our teachers stay. So it's not like we have teachers teaching 1 or 2 years. We have some teachers that are tenured teachers that are not probationary teachers that we had to access. So we're really working as much as possible not to make that happen. However, the reality is that that's part of the way in which we can stabilize the budget. So the other, something else that I talked a little bit about last night, and you know, we are at this time, you know, in the thick of celebrations because it's June, right? So we have our graduations and our stepping up ceremonies. There are so many trips and dances, and that's been really wonderful to see and to watch across the district. We are also gearing up for Summer Rising. We have 5 sites identified across District 3, PS 75, 76, 145, 191, and the O'Shea campus. And at this time, enrollment has closed, but we have been working closely with families who have missed that date to really support them to get to, if it's not the Summer Rising site in their neighborhood, but we're working with other districts to see what we can do to accommodate our students. And our families also received another hot topic. Our families also received their high school offers last week based on the new lottery admissions process. And I spoke with a number of parents that are very happy. And then of course I speak with parents that called my office that are not, right? So there are families that did not get one of their selections. And the way that the process worked this year, that they were, it was a tiered process. So a percentage of students would go into a higher performing, middle and lower, and students would choose 12 of 12 choices. And there are some students that did not get one. And that's something that we are doing right now. We're working with the Office of Student Enrollment. There are wait lists. There is a mechanism on the portal, which is called My Schools. And what I have been advised by the Office of Student Enrollment, and I'll tell you all this, that students who did not get a selection, that they should really put themselves on wait lists in schools where there are better opportunities, because there are many sought after schools that have wait lists of like hundreds of, very high numbers, and even some cases thousands. So though that's going to be really difficult for students to get that school. The other change that has happened is the wait list used to sunset sometime in August, and now the wait list will continue to stay intact until the second week of September. So that's something too that is new, and we're not exactly sure about how that's going to play out. But the Office of Student Enrollment is aware that there are a number of families that did not get one of their choices. I don't know what the numbers look like. I'm hearing that more students received offers, first 3 offers than previously, but keep in mind there was a lot of attrition across Manhattan. So I don't know if it's really the process that created that equity, or if it was just the fact that there has been so much enrollment loss across New York City. What else did I want to talk about? So we're doing a lot of work in supporting our principals as much as possible with the budget. And I was asked by Courtney, and it's a question that I'm still reflecting on. And it was a question that I was asked last night at CEC. And I thought it was so interesting that you asked the same question as one of the CEC members, which was, in thinking about the district and the diverse needs, what would be the 3 priorities, right, that I would communicate to the incoming superintendent as it relates to the challenges in District 3. And, that's not an easy question, and I paused when Courtney asked me last night, and, I thought a little bit about it, and, and it came to me again yesterday in the CEC meeting. And, as I said in my opening, there are so many various and diverse needs in District 3. And one thing that I will say that I don't really believe that we were able to do in the 3 years that I was superintendent is the investment in professional development across the district. While we had some funds, and we absolutely aligned that with remote learning and remote professional learning, it was very underwhelming in my experience, right? So I would often visit our teacher professional developments and whose camera's not on, and we were able to align funds for per session, meaning teachers were able to work overtime. And then the UFT would tell us that we're not, and I work very collaboratively with the UFT, so I'm not putting any shade on them. But it was difficult because we weren't able to say, you got to turn your camera on, and then engaging in professional learning in that way was not as effective as it could be in person. So what I would say as it relates to a priority for District 3 is that the acceleration of learning, and there's been a lot of conversation about gifted and talented, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Just give me 1 second. I just want to get my dog to a different place because she's distracting me. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Thank you. So, in thinking about the acceleration of learning, and Kristen and I, we've had these conversations about mathematics, right? So when I came in 2019, our focus has been on ensuring that every student had an opportunity to take the algebra regents in 8th grade. And that's not something that happens in happenstance, right? There's a lot of planning that has to go into that. There has to be curriculum auditing. There has to be assessments that look differently. Students really need to experience algebra Regents questions in their assessments throughout 7th and 8th grade so that they aren't cramming for Regents in the last 6 weeks, right? We need to develop those structures so that students can be successful and that you're not spending money on tutors at the 11th hour because the students aren't prepared, right? Because that's an equity issue. And I talked about that last night. My daughter is in 10th grade at LaGuardia, and you know, they didn't finish the, yes, great school. They didn't finish the chemistry units of study. And as a result of that, while she was getting 90s, you know, in the class, she was not prepared for the Regents. So I had to get a tutor for her. She had the Regents today. I'm crossing my fingers. She said it was hard. But you know, that's an equity issue, right? So, you know, that is not the fault of the student that the teacher did not get through the curriculum, right? So those are the things that we really have to focus on as a system and as a district. So what I believe would be you know, we talk about acceleration of learning, we talk about G&T, but if students don't have opportunities to go on to high school with accelerated credit, right, in algebra, in social studies, and I talked about this last night, that the social studies curriculum in 7th and 8th grade is American history. And in 11th grade, it's American history. So there is no reason why our 8th graders cannot take the US history and government Regents in 8th grade and go into our high schools with US history and government credit so that they can then take advanced placement courses. The more accelerated credit that our students go into high school with, they have more opportunities for acceleration in high school. And I think that that is one of the misalignments in our department, right? So we talk about this gifted and talented from K to 5, and then what happens, right? It's all, and because there is no gifted and talented in 6th through 8th grade, like that doesn't really exist. So every middle school has the capacity, and right now we have four middle schools that give the American history Regents, although this year it was canceled because there was some controversy about a question. So those are the things that I think, just to really look at things in a way that is holistic and that provides access for all, and still accelerate learning in a way where students can be ahead of the game when they go to high school, is what I think should be the focus in terms of acceleration. So that's something that I just wanted to say. Special education, we have had more referrals this year than we've had previously in District 3. And many of those referrals are coming from our youngest learners, our students in grades K through 2. And I'm also seeing speech as one of the areas of concern, right? So, and think about it, right? Our students, and I've talked to a number of speech pathologists and speech teachers because I found it very interesting. And what they told me is that many of our students with masks who are delayed to begin with and now are experiencing school through mask wearing has certainly been a detriment, right? Additionally, the interrupted learning for the past 2 years and students that were, you know, fully remote, not having that level of interaction has really made a very difficult start of this year. There's a lot of catch up has happened. We've had our SIRS program after school where many of our students experienced a lot of remediation and supports, but that certainly has had some drawbacks. So I do think that if we can continue with after school programs where students have opportunities for enrichment, have opportunities for remediation, I really think that it'll make a tremendous difference in terms of, you know, really addressing the learning loss, because it is real. We are going to, you know, in due time, get our results back from our 3 to 8 statewide exams in ELA and math. They usually come in the late summer sometimes, and depending upon what the scores are, they take some time and look at it and try to figure out how they're going to report it. But we will have them before the fall. I think that will give us an idea just in terms of the standardization across the district and the city, what's happening. I was asked also last night a very interesting question, because this year has been the first year that we have universal screeners for all of our schools. So in grades K through 2, we use Acadience in ELA and math, and in grades 3 through 12, we use Map Growth, NWEA, and you know, our schools have been amazing in terms of, I think we're at like 97% in terms of completion rate, and our principals through the principal performance observations that I do, which is 2 a year. What I look at is through a rubric and how our principals are using data to make decisions, and how our teacher teams are using data to differentiate instruction in the classroom. And I have had some amazing conversations with teachers and how they are making decisions that are data informed in terms of small group instruction. But I'll tell you, what we are seeing is that the schools and the students that have experienced you know, academic challenges, those challenges are still there. And in some cases, they have exacerbated because of the pandemic. We are also seeing, in looking at the screeners and the diagnostics and all of the data that our principals are delving into, we are seeing the disparities, right, with our Black and Hispanic students and Latinx students and our students with disabilities. So that gap has not closed, you know, and I'm not, I try to be an optimist, but I'm not as hopeful that we're going to see a difference in that as we look at the data that comes from the state exams. So I'm going to stop there, because I know I'm going on, and I just want to, you know, ask if you have some questions at this point. I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to some of our members and see if we have questions coming from some of the other YL members, since Blanche and I bent your ear a little bit yesterday as well. Kristen is the first. Yep, lots of questions. Not surprised. Kristen, you're the first hand up, and then Ira.
I was quick on that, Ira. Sorry. I have to start with how incredibly saddened I am that this is the end of Christine's tenure with District 3, because it's been amazing and it really has been a significant turnaround. And Christine knows I was very critical when she first came in. I was not thrilled with the change, and I've been overwhelmed by how good it has been. So let's hope that the next superintendent can pick up that mantle and do as good a job, but it will be. Thank you for the overview report. I think from this committee's perspective, which is what Courtney and Blanche have been sharing with you, is we're trying to frame the issues in terms of this district needs assessment, right? And so specific needs we can come across.
Yep.
So in hearing you talk about like the AP for all and extending it to social studies, because the DNA, I believe, has to really be like a budget ask. So I was wondering if the overall AP for all umbrella is something we should be looking at or asking for more support for.
Yeah.
Like,
So
does that make sense, Christine?
That's a great question. And, you know, one thing that I will tell you that has been very, very different from the previous years, that I really do think that community boards are going to have so much more influence and be able to support differently, because superintendents will be in charge of their own budget. And previously, budget would sit with the borough office, right? So superintendents will make those decisions. So right now, my budget is $11,000 a year, and that's what it's been for the past 3 years. The Community Education Council, their budget was double what the superintendent's budget was. So any type of initiative had to come straight from central. right? So if I were the superintendent coming in September, what I would want is a full out algebra for all, accelerated learning, professional learning series over the summer, right? And clearly we wouldn't be able to start it this summer, right? Because this summer is over, right? So to speak, right? But because I really truly believe that professional learning really has to be during a time when teachers have the time to really reflect and those creative juices are flowing and they have the opportunity to collaborate and they don't have to run to class. Like, and that's what the beauty of Algebra for All was, that happened over the summer. It was phenomenal professional development where teachers really were excited about it. We also worked to departmentalize elementary school so that in 4th and 5th grade, if I taught, math, science, English, and social studies as a 5th grade teacher, I would just teach science and math. And I would really gain that expertise in that content area. And then the social studies and ELA, and then we would do some projects together so that there'd be an interdisciplinary connection. And I think that, really investing in the teachers in a thoughtful way so that they can, because they haven't had the opportunities. And that's the thing, like being remote, professional development did not happen in person. And I really do believe that that is a good part of the money. So I hear what you're saying, like, what would be the priority? Like, that would be my priority, but I don't know what the new superintendent is thinking. But I do think these types of conversations with the new superintendent would be so helpful for him to, really think about which way to go. And my hope is that I'm going to have some time to onboard and have conversations with him about the work that we have been doing in District 3, because we do have an integration grant that, where we'll be able to get some more money this year on top of the money that will be allotted to us by Central. So I can't say for sure in terms of finite financial pieces, but if I were to be the superintendent, I would say that that's what I would really need.
Thank you. One thing I like about the ask for professional development is it doesn't have to be out of an individual school budget. It can be a request for funding that's centralized through the district. Since we know school budgets are directly affected by the city budget, which is now set. So thank you. That would be a good way. I have one specific thing that I haven't heard anything about this year, so I just wanted to kind of check in on it. But is there still an ASD Nest program at West Prep?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the first class graduated this year, Kristen.
Good.
Which is wonderful, yeah. Because in 2019, the program came to West Prep, and the founding class they graduated. So it was a really beautiful ceremony.
That's great. Thank you. I will let my other colleagues speak because I have too many questions. Thank you.
Great. Ira.
Last night's CEC meeting was not one of the best attended that I've ever seen, and I tried to attend it remotely, but the sound quality was, the subways are better. The subway announcements are far superior. So if there's anything else you want to say that you think other people might have heard, nobody heard it outside of that room. So please take the opportunity when we get to this, because, we don't meet over the summer, so this is really the last shot. And I'm going to try not to be too wordy here. So let me just run through the comments I wrote here. Is there anything we can do about the funding? Because I had a conversation the other evening with one of the outgoing principals, and I don't know if there are many outgoing principals, but I know there's a number of outgoing senior staff throughout the system who have just reached the retirement age and the retirement threshold. of pain. So, I think that it was the funding that actually probably pushed a number of people over the edge. And I'm just asking if there's anything on that. Because it'd be great if we could come up with a resolution if there's something meaningful to say. I don't know if there is or if there isn't. Is there anything from the new mayoral control legislation that is going to impact us that we ought to know about? Because it's going to be 3 months before we have another education meeting, and the CEC seems to be often a never land of irrelevance this year. And the new chancellor seemed to flip-flop a lot on high school enrollment, and then at the last he said it's going to change it, then said it's not going to change it, and he thought maybe he would, and then finally said, no, I'm not going to change it. And it is a issue of great stress for many people, and I just want to focus on that, in that it's all the enrollment models are so fungible, you can't figure out what they are until sometimes after you submit your application. And I know that you're not going to be around to have to deal with that. Some of us still will be around, and we don't have the power to influence it, but just asking. And
Christine, do you want, Ira, why don't we have Christine address, especially that question about anything from the new mayoral control legislation?
yeah, and I'd like to just know if there's anything from last night, or Mark could fill in if there's anything he thought, because some of us honestly tried. Okay, that's my sort of batch of questions.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can tell you that, thanks, Ira. And I tried to cover, and Mark, I don't know if I went over my notes that I presented at CEC. So I'm pretty sure I covered everything. In terms of mayoral control or accountability, as our mayor likes to say, I know as much as you do, right? Like, it looks like it's going to be a 2-year accountability control, and it will be revisited. It also looks like there's going to be more members on the PEP. Even some PEP members that I spoke to don't know how they feel about that. It's already really difficult to run those meetings because, parent perspective is not monolithic, right? Everyone has a different perspective on how schools should be run, the priorities in terms of how money is spent. So, I will say that in my experience, and I've been in the Department of Education for 28 years, most of that time I was in the school building, and all of this you get very shielded from, because our teachers, they come to work and their role is to make sure that their students are learning and that they are providing a environment that is affirming for their students. And similarly with the principals. I think right now, parent voice is really is something that they're listening to. And I know that it doesn't feel that way when our perspective is not the one in which, we feel policy is being changed for, or, but I think in terms of the high school process, the change really was because of the pandemic. And, in thinking about the last 2 years, we really did not have a metrics that we could say students, who have, this attendance, or students who scored this on the Regents, and even their report card grades. So there is a possibility that this is going to change again, right? Once school stabilizes and we have Regents exams. I mean, and again, you know, I'm a superintendent, right? And my daughter goes to a very sought after school. And I really don't know how she's going to do on the Regents exams, right? And, you know, she hasn't taken a standardized test since 7th grade. And all of our children are dealing with that right now. And one thing that we are seeing, you know, across our schools is the social emotional impact of this pandemic on our children. And one thing I did say at the CEC meeting last night, and I think it's worthwhile repeating, that, you know, we have to really think about how we are supporting our children, because I know from being in this system for 28 years that a singular test or a bad performance in a class is not going to seal the fate of a child, right? And I think that we need to kind of move away from that. There are a lot of schools, many universities are rethinking the SATs, and more than ever, we're having SAT optional schools and possibilities to get into schools, and how we're really defining success is something to really have conversations about, because we do not want to make it all about a child's identity and the way in which they move in the world, and successes is attributed to performance on a few exams. And I think that if anything, I think that this pandemic has really accelerated that conversation, because we are more than our performance on an exam. So I think that we really do need to focus more on social emotional learning in our schools, and really look at assessments and surveys and really delve into that. We have seen more suicide ideations in our district than ever before. We have had suicides in our district. These are things that we really need to support our students on, and really train not just social workers, because one social worker in a school is not going to cut it, right? That's not the way in which we have to ensure that our teachers know our students well and embed those practices in the classroom, as well as have expectations.
I just want to add, my wife, which some of you know, is actually the part of the Healing Ambassador program for 2 of our schools, one of our district schools and one of the high schools. So there's also engagement of parents, and she set up wellness programs in both of those schools. So we're there, and she runs some Zoom sessions for parents in those schools. So I'm aware of those issues, and those are certainly programs that DOE could expand, and they've had funding for relatively modest stipends, of which I think they've gotten, at least in my experience, a lot of time out of parents getting involved above and beyond.
Hey, Christine, it sounds as if one of the things, if we're talking about what we should be advocating for, it sounds like one of the things you're saying is that perhaps an option here is more funding for those types of social emotional programs, training the teachers, external training as well, which would overlap with some of the HHS.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, when I was a deputy on Staten Island, we engaged with the Staten Island Foundation, which is similar to like a very large community board. And one thing that they did, once they had a very trusting relationship with the superintendent, they gave the district the money. And in doing that, right, and the Staten Island Foundation was part of the professional learning, right, for social emotional learning and culturally responsive, et cetera, so that they were able to see the quality assurance and make sure what they're getting for their money is something that they feel good about, right? But what it also did is created coherency across the district. And it's something to think about, right? Because sometimes when you are giving individual schools funding, then not everybody has that opportunity, right? Or it doesn't level the playing field, so to speak. So it's just something to think about. I think that, you know, the way in which the department is moving is around empowering superintendents. And I think that there will be metrics that will be evaluating the impact of the superintendent's work. So it would make sense for there to be more coherence rather than, you know, individual schools. So it's just something to think about.
Bev, you're up next.
Again, thanks for all your work. I guess it's difficult for you to, in a way, help us set priorities for your successor when that person's not been chosen. But I just was hoping I could drill down a little further in your concept of the accelerated learning and exactly what beyond algebra
Mm-hmm.
would want to see teachers trained in and students able to take regents in, perhaps in the 8th grade and so on.
Yeah.
My own experience, I worked for a number of years at New Visions for Public Schools, and the schools we worked with were very much involved in that. But I think I know the feeling of staff there was very much that the American history regents required a level of sophisticated thinking that was very, very tough for an 8th grader. Just that the content of the regents was really much more a high school level of reading, a high school level of thinking and experience in writing and so on. So I understand the duplication of American history in grades 8 and 11, but I was a little bit skeptical to think that, you know, making a universal access to the regents in US history in 8th grade made a lot of sense. So I guess I'd love to drill down, because one thing we've learned to our regret is that when we can't be very specific, it's very, very easy for the city to turn around and say they can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for that question. And I'll say to you that one thing that high schools don't like it. They don't like it when students come to their high school with accelerated credit, because they have to figure it out. And I was a social studies teacher in 8th grade, and I happened to be in a K-12 school. And we had opportunities over the summer to sit together and collaborate with high school teachers, and we did curriculum mapping together. And I want to push back a little bit, because I absolutely know for a fact that students can handle the document-based questions, the thematic essays, in 8th grade, because we're going back 16, 17 years ago, where I taught heterogeneous classes, and 90% of my students passed the American history regents, and 80% of them scored above 80 and 85. So it absolutely is possible, but it takes an awful lot of planning. So I taught 7th grade and 8th grade. The same kids. It's called looping. So I had the kids from 7th grade to 8th grade, and I knew my kids, and I knew the kid, and I could go down the list of saying who's gonna be challenged in this area, and who's gonna have a hard time here. And then it's all about like designing instruction to support students where they are. So it's not, I'm not gonna say it's easy, but getting back to what I said about the high schools is that when you show up with 6 credits in high school, then the high school principals, they have to figure it out. And that means that when I get to become a junior in high school and I'm taking American history, I'm not gonna go on the waiting list to take an AP class. I'm gonna get the AP class, because that's the only thing I can take. And I think it's about challenging the system, right? Because that's not the student's issue if I'm showing up with 6 credits. So I would also say science, living environment, earth science, you know, the load exam for language, foreign language. Students can potentially go to high school with 6 to 8 accelerated credits. And that is something that we really should be more focused on. And that should be the conversation around acceleration, because that is about planning. That's about supporting students. I really believe that what we give students in terms of a program is an equity contract, right? If I'm going to give you a program and that program isn't going to challenge you, that is not the fault of the student. What they get is what they get, you know? So we have to really think more critically and thoughtfully about how we are triangulating curriculum assessment and delivery of instruction, and how we are really supporting teachers so that they can do that in a way where they feel successful and they're excited about it. Because it's exciting when you teach an 8th grade social studies class and they're taking the 11th grade regents, and you know, you're waiting to see how they're doing. I mean, that's what we want our teachers to feel, you know, being really part of contributing to, you know, the best education that students can get.
I have one follow-up, if I may. You've talked about the tension with high schools around their expectations of what students come in with, and they tend to design their programs currently based on those expectations. Is there something you would suggest that we might put forward in the district needs that would better articulate the coordination between the district and the high school, given the way the DOE is organized? The whole superintendency structure, all the way up to central, these are divided.
Yeah.
They're not, there's no easy way to think about how you coordinate across the 12 grades. And it seems to me that increasingly, as we try to move towards equity, is something that we ought to figure out how to encourage. So if you had any thoughts, I'd appreciate hearing them.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, you know, as superintendents in Manhattan, you know, especially over the past 3 years, our collaboration was really tight. It was tight around COVID, right? It was tight around responding to getting students back to school 5 days a week, you know, how we're getting devices in the hands of students. But I think that superintendents can do a much better job in collaborating around those things. When I was on Staten Island, we had one superintendent, and that superintendent was in charge of 70 schools, pre-K through 12. So if one middle school principal had an issue and there was a problem with, like, you know, programming, and there was a student, you know, it was a phone call. It was like, you got to make that happen. Like, that student has that, you know, so it was different. But I really think that pre-K through 12 districts work really well, but that's not something for this administration. So I think having the conversations, right? Like, you know, having inviting a superintendent, a community superintendent to CB7 and the Manhattan high schools, and talking about this with both of them on the call to say, how will you make that happen? I think that is a way for there to be better accountability for students that deserve it.
Thank you.
Seema.
Hi, thank you so much for all of this. It's been really enlightening. And sad to see that you're leaving. My 2 questions are, you know, you alluded a couple of times about the DOE moving in a different direction, and I was wondering if you could say more about that. And an adjacent follow-up question to that is, how much autonomy do superintendents have? Like, could, District 3 incorporate some of the ideas that you're talking about in terms of accelerated learning and algebra for all, independent of what other districts are doing? Is that a possibility?
So I believe so. I believe that is the plan, right? The way in which the new superintendent's role has been pitched in terms of the application process would be that the superintendent would have more autonomy to make those decisions. The fact that superintendents will be controlling, a multi-million-dollar budget, right? I think is evidence that they will have that autonomy. And I said, and I may have misspoke, but when I said that I believe the department is going in a different direction, I'm saying that that's my personal belief based upon the fact that I was hired as superintendent 3 years ago, and I was sitting in the position for 3 years, and I originally wasn't continuing in the process. So and I don't know exactly why that is, and that's fine. I was called back. I could have gone through the process, and I made a personal decision not to. But I do think that they're still trying to figure a lot out. Because it's been very slow in the making. We only have a couple of weeks of school left, and there's a lot of folks that are still wondering. A lot of my colleagues that are wondering what's happening. So it hasn't been easy. I think with the transition in leadership, especially given, the challenges that we've had in the very beginning of January. We had the Omicron variant. There was a lot of things that they were dealing with. So I think that they're getting the sense that things in a system this large, there's a lot of time that there's a lot of planning that has to happen to make things, move forward.
Got it. Thank you.
So I have to jump off in a couple of minutes because I have dinner plans tonight and people are waiting for me.
You are allowed to do that. Can we let Mark have the last?
Yes,
word? Roberta, I'm sorry, I see your hand up. I will, if you want to forward a question, I'll forward it to Christine offline. Mark, I'm going to give you the last word here.
You're very kind. Thank you for that. To Ira's point, the only other recap I would give of last night's meeting was the outpouring of support for Christine from all sorts, including a nice proclamation from Gail. And to my way of thinking, in a small room, there were a lot of principals and a handful of teachers that also showed up to bid Christine fairly well. And I think that says more than I can possibly say about what Christine's contribution to our district has been. And so gratitude there. And I will personally miss beginning every meeting with a focusing back on, Christine always focuses back on the mission statement and how whatever it is she's talking about relates to it. So for once, the mission statement actually means something instead of just something that you do as an icebreaker at the first meeting. So I'm taking away from your comments in terms of, this is supposed to be a budget meeting. So the professional development over academic subjects is one area of budget priority that you offer us to consider. Another is, in effect, another flavor of professional development, if I'm understanding you correctly, which is the social emotional part of it, because the teachers are the first line of identification of issues. It doesn't get to the social worker, if there is one, until, if I'm understanding you correctly, until the teacher identifies. Right. Last night, there was a person who spoke about security measures in schools. Obviously, this person was reacting. I don't know if you were there for that part. This person was reacting to the news that obviously has troubled all of us. But I think he was reacting in a way that was not taking into account all of the labyrinth of protections and procedures that are already in place. So the question I have for you is there a budget need around school security? I'll note, for example, when that terrible shooting happened in Sunset Park, one of the things that happened immediately was that the public school 2 blocks away from the subway station went on lockdown. So it struck me that that's a system that works. But the question to you is that a need that we should be identifying? And then the last one I'll ask you about is housing insecure kids. Probably not as big an issue in District 3 as in some other districts, but is that a budget issue we should be thinking about too?
Yeah.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
mental health of teachers and administrators.
Yeah. You know, absolutely. So Roberta, I will say, and this is something that I say all the time, that we cannot support our students' social emotional health if we are not well. And, you know, and I believe that 100%, because even when we're not well, right? And we have all been in a place where we're not well, whether it be a couple of weeks or a longer period of time, it affects us. It impacts our job performance. It impacts the way that we parent our children. So it also impacts our teachers. So that is certainly something that we need to focus on. We were doing that prior to the pandemic. There was, you know, a lot of mindfulness, and we do that, you know, in our district meetings. When we have principals meetings, we always take mindful moments. We identify where we are on, you know, on the ruler quadrants, so that when, you know, I'm interfacing with folks, I know where they are, so that I can, you know, kind of adapt my presentation to recognize and be responsive to the social emotional needs of those that are in front of me. So I agree with you 100%. You know, Mark, I think that, you know, in terms of school safety, and this is something that, you know, as a parent, we want to believe, right, that by having, and I do think that New York City does a phenomenal job compared to other places in the world, and we don't have some of the same issues of other places in the world, but also we have a massive population, right? So we have so many more people. So in terms of the, you know, relative risk ratio, you know, everybody wants to feel and believe that their child is safe at school, right? But we also know that we cannot necessarily guarantee that. And it pains me to say that, and it always pained me to say that to parents, but that's the truth, right? So we have to continue being as vigilant as possible with our building response protocols, right? So to your point in Sunset Park, and I was in a school when that news came over my phone, and I was in a school, and I immediately called the school administrator, the district safety administrator, and I said, what are we doing in Manhattan? And he said, well, we're waiting to hear, because he was gone, right? So I'm like, this guy can get on a train and in a few stops be in a different borough, right? So like, that's the other part of it. But yeah, they handled that really well. I mean, we have amazing safety administrators across the district. And we also are experiencing some unstableness with school safety agents, right? So we are experiencing a bit of a shortage. You know, we've had a number of schools throughout. That's something that we're very vigilant about. If they call in sick, we want to know. We want to get a replacement there right away. They report to NYPD. In some ways that's good, in some ways it's not. So, you know, they are hiring an additional 1,000 school safety agents. I don't know how that's going to pan out for our district, but there's certainly a need there. I don't know in terms of, you know, what they need. I think maybe being in touch with Frank Jordan, he would be a great person to invite to CB7. He's amazing. He could tell you about the trainings that they do with schools, with building response teams. In terms of a tangible number, I don't know exactly. But I do think maybe perhaps having parents understand what the protocols are and what the procedures are may give them a sense of feeling safer or not. You know, it all really depends.
Great. Christine, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time and for everything you've done as a parent who had a kid in one of the schools in through this pandemic. I just cannot express to you how important it has been to have your voice at the table, answering questions. and just being available.
And I will let you know where I land for sure. I will
Please
reach out
do.
to Mark and you, Courtney, and everybody, and let you know where I land. It's a direction for me. I hope I find a place where I can contribute and do good work. But it's really been an honor to serve, and I really appreciate all of you. I feel smarter because of you, and I really I appreciate you pushing me, Kristen. I feel like I'm better, I'm smarter, I'm stronger. I feel like I'm more compassionate, leading during this time, and it's really been my pleasure. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Christine. Enjoy your, and we may, if we have a few follow-on questions, I will put them in an email.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to come back. I'm happy to come back because I'm a District 3 parent. So I'm happy to return and be part of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Yes, you too.
Bye. Okay.
We move on.
We shall. I just kind of wanted to confirm what I just said, which is I have no doubt that we will have follow-up questions and even some questions that she just raised in there as we go through the district needs statement. So that is kind of, to me, there was a good starting place, but certainly more there. And Kristen, I know you probably had other questions too. Let's make sure we circle up and get all those questions in one place if we have more we want to send her.
I'll email you my other questions.
That would be great. Yeah, Roberta too. Yep. I have a feeling several of us probably have a bunch of questions. I just want to put them all in one place so that it's one email versus multiple that we
do
ask
we
her
know,
to bear with us.
do we know,
Very quick question. Does anybody know what the schedule is for the new superintendent?
They haven't announced it.
No.
Okay, I mean, we have not had overlap in recent transfers of that position.
That's correct.
Yep.
do we know who Frank Jordan is?
My assumption, I put a little star in my notes, but it sounded like he was the what's the title she referenced? The security.
Safety and security.
There it is. Yeah.
Because we should follow up with that person.
100%. I also, and it was not a question for her, but I have a broader question. For example, when there was shots fired last week, 2 weeks ago, I'm losing track, in the lower 60s, I was the one who called my child's, albeit private preschool, and to say, are you guys inside? Because they were half a block away. And they didn't know, so had to go across the street to pull their kids off of the playground. And so I do think there is a real question for how does this process work, understanding that there are all types of different schools in an area, and that how do we have a system in place that gets information to the schools quickly would be a question for me as well.
I'll just say they're having 3 kids in 3 different schools. During the course of this year, there have been some amazingly unfortunate and appalling gaps in security, where you may have a school with 800 people and 1 school safety officer. And if the rate of retirements that we're seeing throughout the system continue, that you'll see it at the school safety officers as well.
Frank
And you
Jordan,
won't know that until you get to September.
I just double check, by the way, Frank Jordan is the Borough Director of Security for School Safety.
Yes, Mark. Yeah.
He's actually a really nice guy too. I think we ran into him at that walkthrough at Joan of Arc.
That definitely is going on my list then. Seems like there's a lot of interest in that topic too. So I think we should continue to talk about that.
And just to point out, with the school safety agents, I believe they're paid out of the NYPD budget, which it's nice to have something that's not out of the DOE budget for a change.
Yeah, I think that's right.
For those of you who follow parts of the city budget, that was a 0 increase this year.
Correct.
So that's by default an 8% decrease.
Yep.
We won't talk about the budgets for each individual school. That's worse.
Yeah, I started to look at all of those ahead of the call that I had with Christine last night, and for some of them, there are going to be a lot of choices.
But with that segue, that's actually what I wanted to build on, Courtney, because I was wondering if that's something we want to talk about for our DNA. As Christine pointed out, in the past 2 years, schools were held harmless, right, for enrollment. So that held their budgets. So I know that, as Bev pointed out, we like to ask for something very specific, and this is actually something very big, although it's specific. It's just an enormous budget item. But it does seem to me fair for us to at least make some sort of statement that we feel like we appreciate, we understand our schools have lost some enrollment, but they're not going to be able to function as well with these budget cuts.
Yeah, and I think especially, one of the conversations also that is, some of the schools that lost a lot, both in enrollment and through the overall fair student funding, part of the conversation is, okay, well, then they can rely on their PTAs to kind of help close that gap. But obviously that's, problematic in a lot of ways.
And that's for some schools and not all.
Yeah, Roberta.
So, I mean, we're looking at the 2024 fiscal year, which basically 2023 starts July 1 and 2024 starts a year. But we have it was one of my questions, but that I will be emailing you, but we have underfunded, underperforming schools, and we have some schools, the population have parents that are wealthy and are able to raise a lot of funds for the schools. And we have other schools that, have decent principals and have dedicated teachers, but the PTA it does not have access to that kind of money. They can't raise the funds. And so whereas the wealthier PTA can provide money for teachers, for aides, for people, the school that doesn't have the wealthy PTA.
You can't pay for teachers that would be provided. You can pay for supplemental stuff, but you cannot pay for basic stuff.
They pay for things that the other school can't afford. And, I was thinking, I went to public schools in New York through 5th grade. And I went to one school for K through 2. And the principal was really bad and the teaching was really bad. And then I moved to PS 87 in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And I knew as a little child that the quality of teaching was that much better, that the principal really cared, and that there was a whole quality of so kids know this stuff. It's not just the parents. So I don't know how we make a level playing field. You can't tell a parent at a wealthier PTA that they have to give money to the poor PTA. But I think when we're looking at resources, we really should consider, because it's been my philosophy in life that every school in the district should be performing at the highest level possible.
I just want to call out Kristen and myself on that count. And we both spent a lot of time trying to do this for modest amounts of money. And we ran into two roadblocks. One is the regulations didn't necessarily, the chancellor's regs did not necessarily support it. And even when we found slight possible workarounds, the parent opposition was ferocious. I mean, that's, I think, one of the reasons I left my PTA. I mean,
but there are other
and the amount of money is not that significant. It's just not, it's a couple $100,000, and it goes to art and music and aides, but it cannot go to basic classroom teachers. It cannot go to office staff. And a lot of the money we did raise for the aides went to giving the aides a living wage, not for, I mean, when we started, we were paying the aides literally minimum wage, and that was just not fair for people working 30 hours a week to expect them to live and work in this city on minimum wage with a college degree already. So there were places that we could do things, and we talked about supplementing other schools. But when you look at the total number of district schools that need aid, and it really, there were ways of doing seed money, and we agree that that is something that we should do, we should have done, but the roadblocks, I think that's one of the reasons why neither of us were on the PTA board, because we could not actually get anything meaningful, even in terms of seed money. And it just doesn't, and the school we're talking about now has now lost 25% of their students. So it's not necessarily a place you're going to be able to go. I think we need to change the chancellor's regs, by the way, on that one too. So that would actually support what, Roberta, what you're talking about, so that you could at least do modest assists.
Kristen and then Bev.
Hi, I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose the opportunity that Roberta and I had hoped to have.
Oh, sure. Yes.
No, that's what I'm trying to move us into.
Sorry. Yes,
Right.
yes.
To really talk, because we've had our beautifully planned schedule thrown into chaos by the fact that we are no longer planning on July meetings, which was when we were expected to essentially, adopt or finalize the expense and capital budget items. We can't do that now. So we really need to use tonight and perhaps a series of communications by email and so on to come up with essentially whatever revised version we have for the priorities and for the district needs statement.
So I'd like to add to that. So one of the things that we learned this year is that if you have specific locations or specific, every school in CB7 or like when we asked for specific playground, that we're more likely the agency that we're requesting the service from, whether it's the TOE or if it's another city agency, is more likely to respond to that request. So the other thing we'd like to do is if we can get letters of support either from PTAs, from CEC, or from Agata Riverside or Children's Aid or whatever it is, it's also helps in our approach to the agency.
Any other points of guidance you want to give us, both of you, either of you, in preparing the DNS?
Yeah. I think one thing that's helpful and was helpful to me is to see the city responses to our last year's budget requests, because there are certain places I would say from our prior list that it would make sense to go again, because we're not going to get any uptake on those particular items. Like the COVID protocols, I think they said, okay, we're doing it. Bloomingdale branch, we obviously want to include again because we didn't get uptake on that, but I think that's the very specific kind of project we could use, although I would like to see us get some support and some specifics around use that align to the conversations we've had here on youth programming. So that would be good. The pre-K and UPK sites, 3K, they said they're doing, so I think on the capital front, there's space for some additional items that I think should include the wonderful work you guys have done on the scaffolding, and just trying to figure out how to frame something around that. And I think also,
That's not a capital budget, it could be a district needs.
yeah,
So it doesn't necessarily have to be
true.
a budget item, it could be a district need. Children should not be in a school that's surrounded by sidewalk sheds and scaffolding. And we can get some information about that to add to it.
And on the expense side, we asked for all schools to be at 100% of fair student funding. That's what they've instituted, but they've actually now ceased to hold schools harmless for the loss of enrollment. So we can have something around that.
Bev, can I interrupt you for 1 second? For example, given what came out about starting to put caps on the number of in terms of class size, it strikes me that one of the things that we may say, since the state did not, my question is, since the state didn't say, since the assembly said we're going to do this, we're going to phase it in, but didn't actually provide any money to do that. This round of DNS is going to start hitting the time where we may start to see some conflict between the rolling out of caps, potentially, as I understand it, and the lack of money or funds with which to do that without making drastic cuts elsewhere.
Sure.
So is it, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking maybe it's the equivalent of we need 100% of the fair student fundings. Maybe the equivalent here is we need funds to make sure that
We need the state to fund its class size mandate.
but is that appropriate for the DNS?
Yes,
It is?
Yeah,
absolutely. Because
Okay.
what we do with the DNS is a roadmap.
Okay.
And it's a roadmap for us. For example, if you have some resolutions that you passed this year, we can include those, in the DNS, but it's a roadmap. So it's saying to us next December, when you're seeing problems, you're going to write a letter to your state officials and say, listen, part of our DNS is that we want X and Y and Z and we're not getting it.
yeah. But I think we had one item that was increased medical and school safety support staff. And that was nurses, safety agents, crossing guards. I think we need to figure out a way to put some meat around that, and maybe some data around where the shortages are on actual safety agents. If there are genuinely schools that are very low in the number of safety agents, we should call those out. So I think
if you list the PSX, PXY, PSZ need safety officers, where PS A, B, and C already have them. So we list the ones that don't. And I think on the health needs, I think we really have to, the mental health of the students and the teachers are going to be affected for the next 4 or 5 years. So I think, you can there's going to be materials that we can use, that we can quote, and maybe get some mental health professionals that can write a letter of support.
Mark.
So to Roberta's last point there, who would be a great person to look to for that kind of a letter of support? We had at a previous meeting this past year, academic year, remember Kevin Dahill-Fuchel, who talked about, I forget the name of the program, Sanity in the Schools, whatever it was. We all invited him and he gave a very interesting presentation. I bet you he would be a good source for the kind of thing that Roberta was just saying. With respect to the class size thing, I think that we ought to frame, I think it is a budget request, and I think it is appropriate for our DNS and for our budget priorities. However, the group decides it should be prioritized within that list. But I think it should be framed in terms of teachers. There simply aren't enough classrooms in District 3 to split up classes that are oversized. And so we're not going to achieve that goal in the way that people think we're going to achieve that goal, or think that the legislature just said we're going to achieve that goal, which is you walk into a room and you count heads and you only get to 20 or 22. That ain't going to happen because the other 6 or 7 children times 3 or 4 rooms have no place to go unless you put them in the auditorium or something. But what you can do is have more than one pair of hands, more than one licensed teacher in a room. And so the student teacher ratio goes down to something that approximates what the legislature was talking about. I'm not sure if people will be thrilled with that, but I think that's the way, if we're to be realistic, I think that's what we should be advocating for in the DNS.
I mean, to be honest, that's what the private schools do, right? It's not that they have more classrooms, it's that they have 2 full teachers in a classroom that has potentially the same, I mean, really, right? Like,
they have 18 kids in a room, so.
We typically
sometimes
do
they
a
have
lot of that.
more and then they have more teachers, is my point. Is that it's really, it's not a crazy thing to be saying this is how we can achieve this.
We
because
do it
it's
now.
not-
It's called, it's an
I'm for it.
ICT. It's an ICT classroom.
Correct,
Most schools have one at least in each
Correct.
grade.
correct.
Just as to school space though, enrollment is down. So there's space in more buildings than there was previously.
But
And if you look at the district total footprint for students, we do have enough space for all of the students. Not necessarily in the buildings they're currently in, but
That's-
district-wide we do.
Right.
you want to rezone the district again? You're not on the CEC.
Have to have a child to run for the CEC. It should be rezoned regularly. There's no reason why it
Be
should go.
careful what you ask for.
I don't think we need to do all that. I do think saying we need funding if we're gonna do these if we're gonna hit these caps, is because so far everything I'm seeing is like a lot of people going, well, okay, but this is coming.
Right.
Okay, sorry, Bev. I think I stopped your train before it had reached.
I just think we have to unbundle a number of the things that we sort of squeezed, a very diffuse text into these sort of a small number of budget requests so that we would be able to get everything in there. I think the strategy this time might be to go after less comprehensiveness and more targeted asks that really address some of the issues she was talking about. I'm very intrigued by this idea of the rebuilding, and it is rebuilding. I mean, this is return to way life used to be under, pre-Bloomberg, sort of district superintendents with their own budgets and their own staff, and that sometimes worked very well, like Tony Alvarado in District 2, who did amazing work. And sometimes it didn't work out very well at all. And you had, in those bad old days, superintendents arrested for fraud and, people buying and selling principalships and the like. But I think in a way, there's an opportunity, if that's the strategy, to do something a little different than talking about school-based spending, because there will be a number of functions that operate out of these newly constructed district offices. So I think maybe the mental health piece could talk about resources at the district level to be distributed as per need and data. And there are sort of other functions around this notion of accelerated learning that could be actually driven out of the district office. I do think we also need to get to the high schools, which we haven't really done in the past because our focus has been on District 3 and the Manhattan High School Superintendent, and some of the schools that are in the district, high schools that are in the district, might be places to get additional insight that we haven't relied on in the past.
And as a rule of thumb, capital and expense priorities should be more driven to specifics, and district needs can be more general, but should really relate to the district.
Yeah.
There's also a parallel session that is held every year between SCA and the CEC on capital needs. So I don't know about how that overlaps. I'll let somebody who's been involved in that process.
Do you know when that occurs, Ira?
It's Kristen, Mark, when does that usually?
March. They can schedule it at any time because they have to rotate through all 32 CCs, right?
Right.
But they have to have that meeting at least once a year. And they come and they present to your district specifically. Like, this is what we're spending doing citywide, but this is also what we're spending and doing in District 3.
And I think it has to happen before March because the PEP votes on something that relates to that in March. And so they have to roll this out usually it's in January, February, isn't it?
Yes.
It's the amendment. Usually there's an amendment to the 5-year plan.
And that gets voted on usually in March. It gets proposed in November. So that's why it's on the timing that Kristen was saying.
So it's not the most convenient timing for this process, but we should certainly be aware of when that occurs. And there is, I mean, we have made a contact with the SCA around the scaffolding issue. Maybe that person can give us someone to talk to more generally about the planning side of funding for our district.
Kristen froze just as I thought she was going to say something really good.
I think maybe she'll come back in.
Okay.
I also do think we should kind of drill down back and maybe circle back and get something specific around special education needs. That's another group. We spoke to, we had a meeting on that. I forget what month now, January. But I definitely think we need to make sure that's represented this time around. Those kids have not had an easy 2 years, and I want to make sure that we have a really good sense of specific to our district what we may be able to do.
Didn't Christine say that the number of applications for certification was up a significant amount?
She did, but so for example, I spoke to one teacher I know who has, for example, an ICT class, and he was like, it's something as specific as, do we need more 12s in our district? Like, if we're really talking specificity, I think that's the kind of thing that would be helpful. I mean, I think one of the things that became clear from that meeting, whether it was January, I'm just losing track of time altogether, was that kind of was the evaluation process. But it sounded like our district didn't have one part of the problem, which is getting the evaluators to come to our district, but may have the other part of the problem, which is who's getting evaluated in the early education space. So I kind of see it as that, but then also once we have them, do we have what is needed for them in our district, or are we forcing people to travel is my question.
Didn't we do a resolution on this about 6 months ago?
We did.
Yeah.
We did, but I think from putting a kind of the district needs and the budget priorities lens over it is slightly different than what the resolution, because the resolution had a lot of kind of very broad, we need this as a city. It had kind of it had that pay piece for the special education teachers. And I think that's different than if Bev is talking about making this really specific, that's not in that resolution.
Courtney, I have a question for you. Do you think going forward, resolutions should focus also on the needs of the district?
They should, and we did ask that in that meeting, for example, and we didn't have an answer for it in that meeting, but I think it's now making it clear that yes.
Maybe
we
going
should.
forward, we should
Yeah.
think of, you know, a general thing, but also this is what the district needs. So we, because then we could pick that up next year and put it could fall right into the,
Yeah.
you know, rather than have to extrapolate.
Just, we did ask it in the meeting because you've trained me well.
Right.
But we,
I didn't get the right answer.
but we didn't get the right answer. So I think it would require circling back. Okay. Bev, I keep derailing you. I apologize.
No, I really, I don't know that this is the moment to come up with a list. I don't know if you want to organize a process, perhaps, Courtney, and
Yeah.
Blanche, where, you know, you pull together what you think might make sense, just
Yeah.
as rough as you like, and maybe circulate it, and we'll all chime in and, you know, put forward. Yeah, because from here on out, we're basically going to have to do much of this by email
By
and
email.
or
Okay.
Google Doc or, you know,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, we can work out of Google Docs so that we're not.
Right. But to sort of take what we did last year, figure out what's salvageable, and then to add things that we think are much more kind of crucial right now.
Bev, you had mentioned we should consider the city responses to last year.
Right.
Do you have that, or where can we get that?
Yes, we sent it to you in March, but I can resend it.
You sent it to Marge?
I sent it to both you and Courtney in March, and I will gladly resend it.
Would you do that? Fine.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay,
Sure. I'd be glad to,
thanks.
because some of their responses were, we're already done it, it's in the works, don't worry about it, or forget
Okay.
it, we're
Got
never
it.
gonna, or
Okay,
forget it, we're never gonna do it, you know, so you see the responses. I mean, we asked for one thing, we asked, it has nothing to do with YL, but we asked for funding for NYCHA, and we were told to ask our local electeds, and this is like, you know, $40 billion our local electeds don't have. And, you know, some of the responses were really good, and some of the responses were ridiculous.
Reddy has been holding out on us. He's got $40 billion in the bank that he can help us with.
Wait, so just out of curiosity, and then we can keep moving, but does that mean that on things like NYCHA as well, they're gonna have to be hyper specific of like elevators here, security systems?
Oh, we were.
No,
very-
it's not elevators, it's elevator.
But you know what I mean? Like,
No, we were very specific about what we wanted. We asked, I mean, some of the things we asked for were very specific. Some of the things were, you know, a couple of the responses were really good. For example, we asked for the ramp at 78th Street and Riverside Park, and we were told it was done because they assumed that it was part of the 79th Street rotunda, but it's a separate. So I went out and took pictures. So we now have pictures, just when we submit, if we submit it again, we can have pictures with it. So, you know, I will send you again the comments so you have them, and
what number, and what, oh, I know, what number are you all looking for us to submit? I know last year we had a target.
well, we were going to do 20 and 20 expense and 20
Across all agencies.
but basically you had the most, and that's fine.
what's your time frame on this?
We'd like to have it mid-July.
Mid-July.
If we need to add something in September, we will, but we'd like to have the gist of it by mid-July because it's very labor intensive. Bev spent hours, and so did I, basically bothering Courtney about a lot of things and other committee chairs to get specific information because you need to have the what it is, why you want it, what good it's going to do, who the stakeholders are, how many, so if we know that, for example, children who are being served who have disabilities in the district, and we know how many haven't been, those are numbers that would be good to put in. So they seem to like having data.
Yeah, I would also say, remember, and maybe this is something we can at least take a rough stab at now. First of all, they're treating youth and education as separate buckets. So
Separate bucket.
Buckets.
Separate bucket.
Separate buckets so that they have separate, where it says, what are your 3 highest needs? There's a separate one. It's not, it's education, 3 highest needs, youth, 3 highest needs, right? So it would be probably helpful to think of, do we have a consensus over what we think are the 3 highest needs in education? This would be in the district needs statement, not the actual list of projects.
Again, I think this is where if we put things in a Google Doc, let's have that let's hash that out.
It sounds good to me.
And people can add and we can have. Yeah.
Sounds like a good plan.
Okay. Okay.
So you should just get it rolling quickly.
Yep.
Okay.
New business, Courtney?
Yeah, so let's talk about scaffolding. Just a little bit of background. Max and I spent, so we had that meeting in December with PS 333, parents, PS 165, the SCA. Josh and I spent a couple of months trying to get this data, get this information, to really understand where 333 and 165 were in terms of how many other, was this the tip of an iceberg problem? And we didn't make a lot of headway. We did also talk finally we got someone in the comptroller's office to talk with us. Still no headway. We finally got the Excel spreadsheet from Gail Brewer's office. And as I was explaining to Ira, right when we opened this up, the data didn't show what we knew to be the full duration. So for example, like one of them, whether it was 333 to 165, I can't recall. The earliest date on their work was like 2018, which we know is not the case since we know those projects are 7 years and 10 years respectively. So we knew we didn't have the full data set. So Mark very kindly spent some of his free time while he was on vacation, which was really just above and beyond, brainstorming with me. And then he said, why don't we do, you could do something totally crazy, which is you just call the schools. So that's what we did. So off of the Excel spreadsheet that Gail Brewer's office had sent us, we took out the schools that had just had kind of the similar work. So roofing, exterior, parapet work. And then we called. And so there were, just to make sure I'm getting this right, there were 156 schools currently under SCA project management. Of that number, there were 61, I think, that currently were doing this roofing, exterior, and parapet work. Of that, when I called, 29 of those, so about half, had scaffolding up. And then when we broke it down, asking people how long this had been up, it got even smaller, right? So it got even more, frankly, obvious that that these two projects that we have in our district are really outliers. And hang on, I'll share my screen to show what I sent out earlier. One moment, if I can do that. Oh, weird, it's not letting me.
You should have permission.
Oh, there it is. I see it. Okay. Okay, can everyone see this? Hang on.
Yep.
This is not full screen. Okay, it just is what it is. All right, so just my caveats here. This data is really, really anecdotal. This is not from the SCA. I did make that request too. I have not received that data. And then, so this is what I just said, 61 schools, 30 said no scaffolding. I wasn't able to reach 2. I think what was really interesting here was that most of the schools that currently have scaffolding up have really had it up for under 3 years. That really seemed to be where schools are living in terms of how long this is undergoing. And I would also just put the caveat here that this was also due to COVID, which we knew slowed down a lot. But this is what really most schools were in this time frame. So I really only found 5 schools that that had that 5-year range. There were 3 more, so it was 8 total were in that 4 to 5 range. But I kind of started to try and figure out where the fall off points were. 5 schools in that 5-year range, again, very approximate, very anecdotal, not really sure if that's 6, could be 4.5, hard to say. But 2 of those schools are our schools. I will give an update on this. I did hear back from the SCA today. West Side High, which is headed up for about 3 years, is scheduled to have it down at the end of August. So this one will come off the list, as will PS 111 as well at the end of the summer. So the thing that was really, I think, interesting to me coming off of this is that what that means is they were outliers. So this could have gone 2 ways, right? It could have gone, okay, these 2 schools, this is really indicative of a much larger problem that needs to be looked at. Instead, it kind of fell out the other way, which to me, these are such outliers. They really should have received closer attention, much more oversight, much more attention earlier in their timeline. So kind of all the things that ended up happening now at the end needed to have happened many years ago. Just because there just aren't that many. So it's not that onerous of a task, even if you put the cutoff at anything that goes past 3 years, starts to have kind of the oversight, the community engagement, the regular email or Zoom call updates, things like that. And then because when you look at it in a greater, even kind of the broader SCA perspective, really like the number of projects that this is, and I'm assuming the REP, this is where my data set is not complete, but I'm assuming these projects have kind of the longest duration. It's really only 3%. So these are really unusual. There aren't that many of them. And therefore it kind of, that me to the place of saying, therefore I feel a lot more comfortable saying something like a resolution of when you have projects that get to this point, there should be certain things in place that automatically get triggered in order to do this. I'll stop screen sharing right now so that I can see all your faces again.
I just want to say a couple of things about 333. I'm going to spare everybody about a treatise that I will write on the public procurement of capital construction in New York City for after my retirement, because if I write it now, I will immediately be retired as a New York State employee involved in a capital program. But the DOE does a number of things that does make their life more difficult. They have had other programs that have been far more time successful than the method they're working under now, and I've worked on those programs. But in terms of 333, Barbara Denham, who was a member of the CEC for a number of years, regularly engaged SCA on 333 while it was in its earlier stages. Later on, the contractor defaulted. And to remove a public works contractor was also, you have a performance bond on, takes years because it's a long negotiation process with the bonding company. So there was a period of several years that nothing really happened. Then we got hit by COVID. Then we got hit by a number of, during that whole process, there were also some conditions, and I know some of the people who worked on this probably a bit better than the person who was sent here. There were some concealed conditions in the building that required them to rethink the whole design process, which of course took additional time. There were problems with supply chains, which actually happened before the actual supply chain problems. So it is sort of a perfect storm. With that said, going back to Roberta's comment about scaffolding being up on the school for a prolonged time, in the late part of the 1990s, the New York City ran 2 programs for roofs and exterior wall restoration and window replacement. One was run by SCA. They did roughly 80% of the work, and it ran on these prolonged schedules. There was another, which I did work under that program. There's another program that was run by New York City DDC, which took a very different process, which said we have the school for 3 months every summer. We come in June 1, we're out by September 1, and we have pretty much free run of the school. So the month of June was spent loading up the material, putting the trailer in, getting the scaffold up. That was the month of June. And unfortunately, if you lived next to one of those schools in July or August, you might well be subject to 2 or 3 shifts to get the school done, but it worked. And the upside of that was you didn't have it the rest of the year in the middle of the night. If you go by 333, you'll see there's construction sometimes going on in the middle of the night when the kids are not there, so forth and so forth. That program really did work. It used a variation of the public procurement process. I worked under that program. We did a lot of schools very successfully, very quickly. But then the work was reconsolidated. I won't go into the reasons for that, but there are other ways of doing this. SCA is familiar. The city is familiar. I think some of it may have had to do with the changes in mayor, the original enabling legislation that created SCA, so forth and so forth. So Roberta, to your question, this can be done without the students in the school. It can actually be done more expeditiously because you don't have to remobilize every day. You actually can have you can actually do, particularly when you're working in the summer, it's not hard to do 2 shifts. It's very hard in the winter to do 1 shift. So there are ways we can get this down. But PS 165 is an outlier. I don't know the details of that one in any detail, but there are different bodies of schools. That's a CBJ Snyder school like PS 166. They are far more complex.
So Ira, what you just said supports perfectly what kind of some of the conversations we've had behind. And so I would like to propose that we do a resolution on this. I have a couple of suggestions. I can share my screen, and if that's helpful for people to get reactions, because I think one of the things we have in there kind of encapsulates, Ira, exactly what you kind of just alluded to. Is that helpful? I can share my screen again. All right. So the first is the piece I was talking about originally. Institute a policy of greater oversight and communication for all SCA projects lasting beyond 3 years in duration, which include such measures have been put in place for the PS 333 project, including regular meetings between the SCA, local neighbors, and the school parent community, regular SCA attendance at the local community board's district service cabinet. That one's for you, Max. Bi-weekly email updates regarding project timeline and worker hours for the upcoming period. That's kind of what's been happening at PS 333. And then the second piece here, I think Ira gets to what you're talking about, which is a suggestion. And I don't want to be too prescriptive because I don't want to step in something where clearly, I mean, as Ira just showed, like to get into the weeds on this is to get very deep very quickly, but re-examine the scoping and RFP procedures at the beginning of all. I put in REP school construction projects, but we can talk about whether it can just
It's
be all
competitive.
schools.
These are typically competitively bid.
What'd you say?
They're competitively bid.
Right, but to your point,
From pre-qualified lists. So how you get some of these people who are pre-qualified and then they go on to spectacular defaults is another question. But we have those two. I have those two.
but again, I guess my question is there language that makes sense here in order to get back to how are we planning these projects? Because if the plan is years and years and years and not very quickly.
You do them years and years and years, but you do them when the kids aren't in the school. For example, there have been years where 333 has been closed during the summer to all uses except the district office, and visitors for the district office were actually banned.
And then I think the third piece is the question of, are there contractors where this happens frequently?
I think that third piece, I think, addresses what Ira brought up, and I think it's great. That's really important. Is when they bid them, they don't say take 8 years. They say they should take 3.
But there are ways of doing it. You do get schedules, and a lot of the public works contractors live on the idea of delay claims, because delay claims can be far more profitable than actually doing the work.
What does that mean, Ira?
Oh, let's say the contractor submits a plan and SCA or the design team or the construction managers takes 3 weeks to approve it instead of 2 weeks because it's incomplete. So the contractor will say, well, I've been delayed a week, so therefore I'm entitled to XYZ because I had additional expenses, additional insurance, I had to pay additional rental on the trailer and on the scaffold, and it kept me from getting other work because I tied up my bonding capacity. So that week I'm entitled to $100,000.
Okay, I have a question that you might be able to answer. In the case of invited tenders, when you are inviting bids, is there a requirement that the decision has to go in favor of the lowest bidder?
Most lowest qualified bidder. I mean, if you've, and the SCA has a pre-qualification procedure. So when you get but you know what, the guy who was the good contractor the year before may have run into some financial challenges. You know, I can come up with any number of things. They may be a first time out. They made the requirements of the finances. They hadn't screwed up a job yet. Principals may have.
Everybody's bidding on the same specs.
They're all bidding on the same plans, the same specs.
So does the award have to go to the lowest bidder? Because when you bid, one has to assume that you have the capacity to fulfill the requirements.
Well, for example, my agency, if we get 5 bids for a project, one is $1 million, one is 3, one is 3.5, one is 0.375, one is 4. We toss the bid at $1 million. Obviously, the person did not properly estimate the job and has no understanding.
Okay, so it's not a requirement. Okay.
But generally speaking, then you have to have very good reason to discount that bid.
Okay.
And sometimes that's another thing where you lose time, is that the contractor who got their $1 million bid tossed will hire a lawyer and argue that they should get it, and you lose 6 months while that process goes on.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Courtney, with respect to the resolution, I'm looking, first of all, in the first bullet point, if you would agree, that should apply both to projects lasting beyond 3 years and projects anticipated to last beyond 3 years.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
many years, SCA had a rule that you could not submit a project as a design professional. You could not submit a project that lasted more than 3 years on a schedule. So if you had a project that actually was going to take 6 years, you just broke into phases and halved all the phases, knowing that it would full well last longer.
So now thinking about the third bullet point, I wonder if there's something more that we can say than what's there. I like what's there for sure. And I'm thinking about what my limited understanding of PS 165, and maybe Kristen has more information on this. But what I understood happened there is that they did one project and then discovered that they needed to do another. So the project multiplied once the shovels went in the ground and so forth. Which is one of the reasons why, you know, it's
Correct.
scaffolding.
But
So
hang on.
is there a, go ahead, Kristen, I'm sorry.
It was a wholly predictable additional problem.
That's what I'm saying.
This is very typical of the CBJ Snyder schools. So
Yeah.
I would confirm.
And Ira, that's kind of the point, isn't it? That if it wasn't in the original scope of work, but any person who knows, for example, CBJ Snyder schools would know to look for that and put it in their bid, then they shouldn't get a buy on the extension or the delay. So maybe
they wouldn't put it in their bid. They would only bid what's on the drawings.
Understood, but what I'm thinking about for the third bullet point is to expand it to say, considering an audit of contractors, and as you say, to assess whether specific contractors have an above average rate of removal or delays in projects, and an above average rate of expanding the scope. I'm riffing here, but the idea is an above average rate of expansion of the scope of the project that results in a prolonged or delayed completion, something like that. I don't know.
At the risk of throwing my own folks under the proverbial bus, it's design professionals too.
Oh, you're right. We're only talking about contractors. You're right. You're right. It should be all design professionals. Yeah. And engineers. So it should be contractors.
That includes engineers and architects.
Architects and engineers. You're absolutely right. I didn't focus on that.
I mean, if you have a CBJ Snyder school, SCA should not be assigning somebody who has been doing one-story schools in Queens or Staten Island to do a CBJ Snyder school. And I don't think they do, but sometimes they do. I know they did.
Well, the guy who did 166 did a great job. So I'm not sure that that's always the case. But the larger
like
point,
I said, it varies.
Yeah. But to Courtney's work here, I think if we expand it, something like what I think you got the idea. I think that would be a more complete way to address these things. And who does the audit? Would it be the comptroller's office? I don't think SCA should be carrying it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't we go? We could give it to Rachel Lazarin.
DDC.
Yeah, they'd love that. They're in the same building. They're sort of rivals.
Well, I'm all for
I'm joking.
rivalry, but I think this is the job of the comptroller's office. So that's where my money would go.
OMB also reviews things, but they're real nitpickers.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I see somebody sticking up for OMB there.
They got enough to do.
Isn't there an auditor general for the SCA?
There's an inspector general.
There's an inspector general. Well, that might be the right role person.
I'm just putting these notes down at this point.
As I said, if I ever got a hold of an audience for this, I would no longer be employable.
It sounds to me like we have the bones of a very helpful resolution here, but that we can't fine tune it without sort of checking some facts. And
well, we have till September.
That's right. So maybe we should move on. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And
I agree. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll see if I can figure out who would be the appropriate. Who would be the appropriate? Hang on, let me stop.
For the audit?
or that, yes. 1 second.
Why don't we say conceptually, we support this and
Okay.
we are fine for fine tuning of language, or is that appropriate?
Do we
Mark?
need, should we, I think we can, do we vote on it and then we'll fine tune the language?
That's fine.
Okay, okay.
That always happens with us.
More Google Docs, guys, more Google Docs. Okay, all in favor of,
Forum for a vote.
wait, all right, hang on, what?
Before we vote, I want to know what you mean. What's the mechanism for fine tuning the language? What does that mean?
Oh, I send it out in a Google Doc, and we all weigh in.
Okay. Mark knows not having the specific language makes me very, very nervous
Abstain then.
before I vote on something.
Well, if it's
I
any
don't
comfort-
anticipate it's going to be very, in this case, I don't anticipate it's going to be very different, other than it sounds like potentially we just need to figure out who we're directing this to if we're suggesting an audit.
And
Here, I'll share
this
this
is a
again.
committee vote. It doesn't count until we get to full board.
Correct.
So
you
if
can
you're
always vote
unhappy
against
with the
it.
final language, you'll have an opportunity to speak to that at full board.
That's true. Yeah, it wasn't this particular one. It was just as a practice in general. It's unnerving.
It's why you see people at full board voting against something that their committee voted to approve.
Okay, are we voting on it?
In theory, this should never be applicable because SCA should never have a 3-year schedule.
Are we voting on this?
Wait. Right, but I remind the point of, okay, we can finagle that afterwards. Let's vote. Okay. All in favor? And then, oh, weird, I can raise my hand.
Yes, yes.
Okay, and Blanche, you're raising your hand. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and Blanche is 7. And that's everybody. So, any opposed? Hang on. I gotta lower hands, hang on. Can everyone lower their hands? For some reason, having trouble lowering hands. Okay. All opposed? That's 0. Abstaining. It's going to be 0 and 0 because there's nobody left to vote in our committee. All right. Passes 7 to 0 to 0 to 0. Thanks all. We have 2 attendees. Any questions from the attendees? I don't see any hands raised.
I'd offered to promote both of them actually earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Wait, Max, are they getting promoted?
Oh, no, sorry. I said earlier in the meeting I'd offered.
Earlier.
Oh, got
Yes.
it, got it. Okay.
Right.
So I'm going to assume that's a no.
Yeah.
No outstanding business. Blanche, anything else? I don't think, so we're not meeting in July. Is that is my,
You're welcome to call a meeting if you want in July, though.
No chance. But- Okay, we spend enough time on the phone, Courtney and I, but anyway, okay.
well, that's all I have other than the slew of emails you will be getting on this resolution and also on DNS. So
Courtney, let me
yeah.
just, sorry to
Yeah.
say something. I think everybody has gotten the notice about what happened at Bloomingdale Library.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. Yep.
Anyway, I am thinking,
Wait, has everyone?
well,
No, they have not, Blanche.
because the librarian sent it to the entire board. For those of you who may not know, when the staff went in on Monday, I guess it was, there was an enormous flood on the first floor and the lower level.
And that basement.
Yeah, that's what I mean by the lower level. And they'll be closed for about 4 to 6 weeks. I
Yeah.
think that library is jinxed. What happened apparently, there was a water main break between the library and the building next door, which is a health center facility. So we are working with them. And, you know, they have to juggle between St. Agnes and the Columbia branch.
There's,
But
there's-
just,
sorry,
Well-
there's two implications, which is that they were going to serve as kind of the carryover for St. Agnes, which is going to have some work done this summer.
It's
and
also
that-
going to be, which is also planning to be
No,
closed.
because anyway, so that'll now flow over to else. The other piece of this is that they're a cooling center. So one of the things that Jesse is doing for us is kind of staying on top of when that list is released of cooling centers. So we'll try and publicize that they are closed and where the other adjacent cooling centers can be for as it starts to get hot, like basically tomorrow.
so Max, we will try and get that out from our office to whomever
Once that updates.
and so on. So I just wanted people to know,
So if I could jump in for a quick second,
yeah,
I would be delighted if our website or whatever it is that we're thinking of were to have the updated information about where to go since during the period where this is not in service as a cooling center. But my old fashioned brain says that we should get somebody with a paper flyer on the inside of the door that says your nearest cooling center is Columbia Library or St. Agnes or whatever it is, because some of those folks are going to the library specifically because they don't have internet and computers at home.
well, not only inside the door, but I will talk to the librarian this week, and she has done up a very nice flyer. When they have the info about the cooling centers, maybe get it around to places like the public housing and those places. I could get some up in my complex here in my buildings so people will know.
There's a food pantry at 99th and Amsterdam on Saturdays. There's the West Side Campaign Against Hunger. That's where they should be putting these flyers, I think.
Yeah,
So if
okay,
you're talking to her, maybe you could just share that.
sure.
Yeah, those are great ideas. Jesse, I don't know if you're still actually on, but let's talk about what else we can do. And also, if they don't have it updated in the next couple of days, let's see if we can track that down because it's already getting hot. I think I was looking at it and I think we're going back to the 80s and 90s in the next couple of days. So it's already hot.
Okay, I will look into
Oh,
it.
you're there. Hi.
Yeah, I've been listening this whole time.
And she was just texting me about a few things in the background as well. So yeah.
Oh, just have the camera off. I'm jealous. All right. That's all the business I think I have. Blanche, do you have anything else?
Nope.
All right. Back to the expect the slew of emails and some Google Doc links. And Bev, we will do our best to get you what you need as fast as we can. I think we were not the last ones in last year. By a lot.
No, we were
So
not.
You can,
we will do our best. All right. That's all I have.
Call for adjournment.
Move to adjourn. Thanks all.